Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you are doing well, and today we are having an exclusive conversation with the one, the only Mr. Cameron Picton, whose new project, my new band Believe, has a self-titled record dropping very soon, April 10th. We are going to talk about that and anything else that comes up in the conversation. Cameron, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You obviously, since the dissolve of Black Midi, you yourself have also kind of like, stepped into, the solo project game and direction. You have this new record that's about to drop. People have heard a few tastes of what my new band, Believe, has to offer so far. Let's try to give people like a bit of a heads up with, what is in store with the record. Like, when did you start working on this project and sort of what was the writing and production process like?
Well, I started working on it, not thinking about it becoming this around the time the band was kind of like disintegrating. And I started doing these solo shows at like the Windmill, and which is this like local venue that I've played like loads with
Oh,
Black Midi and all this
we've
kind of
had
thing.
lots of conversations on this channel
Yeah,
about the windmill
I'm sure.
and the scene. It's become a phrase.
Okay. Yeah, I played a bunch of solo shows there, and I was kind of like not really wasn't there was no really like goal of doing it other than to write songs for that show. There was no kind of like long term thing of like, I'm going to do this solo career now or anything. So it was quite exciting. Just like I never really played by myself before, and it was a fun challenge to set yourself. Once a month is like I'll write three new songs that are at least passable, and you see what happens. And then I kind of like I was also approached at around the same time with the band Caroline to work on a collaborative record with them.
Hmm.
Um, where it would have been like a kind of like me and them situation, or I would like they would be my backing band, or like it was I don't know, it was a more open proposition than what it ended up becoming. But I spoke to them early on, and then I kind of like ended up developing the songs, and they were making their album. It was all like quite a relaxed, let's do something. Um, and then yeah, once we came to do it, the songs were kind of like pretty much finished in their writing, and I expected it to be a more open thing. So that meant that then the arrangements became more of an open proposition. And just I ended up getting basically anyone who was around to come and play.
I mean, speaking of anybody who was around, I believe it was like the most recent single and teaser, Love Story, that you came through with, that even has a Georgia Ellery credit on it in the
Yeah.
writing bit, if that's the case.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that was less like a kind of collaboration and more just like theft of one line. Uh,
Got it. Got it. Got it. Honestly, that speaks to you. The fact that you're willing to make sure that you give credit where it's due.
yeah. Yeah.
When there is some inspiration that's being taken from a contemporary.
Yeah.
Well, still with that being said, like as far as people you're collaborating with and where a lot of the backing instrumentation is coming from, does that mostly come from that Caroline connection for the most part throughout the record, or are you able, or were you kind of borrowing or calling out other collaborators too throughout the album?
Three of the tracks are kind of yeah, like the most of it is members of Caroline, and there's a few extra other people. Love Story, Pearls, and then the last track, One Night, are all taken from the initial sessions. But everything else kind of started up from just me and a drummer playing in a room together, and then building out from there. So sometimes Caroline members came and played on it, but from there it was kind of much more open.
Okay, okay. And the production process, were you mostly handling that yourself on this project too, or were you taking this to a studio once you had things like sort of demoed and written?
I didn't do demos for any of the tracks, which is probably one of the reasons it took ages. and then and then yeah, like me, Mike and Jasper, who are like the two of the principal members of Caroline, they co-produced it with me, and then at a certain point, I kind of like took over it, and once they were doing the promotion for their album, I kind of did most of it. And so once I kind of like got into it with overdubs, that was me. But they kind of were there, and they were at all the studio sessions and stuff. It was a
Um,
mix.
hmm hmm I know that historically, especially when it's come to lyrics, as obviously a lot of people watching and a lot of fans are kind of used to the world in which you typically would have written sort of like within the context of like a black MIDI session or record, especially on Hellfire, kind of like feeding into how a lot of those songs kind of had these really grandiose kind of like stories and narratives, some of which felt quite nightmarish. Would you say you were kind of pulling from a similar place on this record as well, or did going in more of a solo capacity allow you to write and sort of pull from more maybe a personal context?
Well, yeah. I mean, when I started doing the solo shows, I was kind of thought, well, I'm not really satisfied with any of the stuff that I've kind of brought to the band in the last 6 months or whatever. So I just thought, oh, why don't I just scrap everything and then start afresh without it necessarily being for anything. So all of these songs were kind of, yeah, written. I don't know, not like, I don't think I was really thinking about it any kind of way of like, oh, now I don't have to do songs that are like these crazy things or anything like that. But I think there was just more of a thing of yeah, I guess keeping an open mind about what it is and just following a thread on a song by song basis and just seeing, oh, let's try this, oh, let's try that, rather than necessarily being like, oh, I'm going to do this thing now, I'm going to do this thing now.
And now that the project is sort of like, complete, would you say that this project has, or my new band has like almost a distinct sound or sort of like persona from what people might sort of, associate your songwriting with in the past? I mean, between Numerology and Love Story, already between these tracks, there's quite the range in terms of like the bases that are being covered.
Yeah, I mean the album I think is a very specific mood. And I think maybe if the like lyrically it's not necessarily the same, or even some of the songs are quite different, there's still this kind of prevailing mood across the whole thing. Um and that was yeah, I think the main goal was not necessarily like yeah, it was more just about kind of creating this atmosphere that reinforced itself over the whole thing. And then yeah, like Numerology is obviously just a very different proposition. And I think there's just, I think with the album, I was just like trying to do one, specific type of thing. But then I did Numerology kind of concurrently, so left it off because it felt like, okay, well, at least when this comes out, we can kind of present like another idea. It's not just this like down thing.
In terms of tone and inspiration, I mean, for anybody who doesn't recall, Numerology like was obviously released as a single. It's my new band song, but it is not on the new album. Like, in terms of tone, is it like far too frantic to sort of like have fit in the track list with all the other songs that are going to be on the record once it drops?
Yeah, I mean, I performed it live just with a drum machine and guitar, and there was the only song that actually like I did like that, and it kind of felt the whole time. And I didn't even consider recording it for the album. And then, yeah, it's too crazy, or like it's too crazy in a specific way, and it's basically dance music. And I think it would just be too much of an outlier, whereas all the other songs on the album are related to each other in some way. There's also like a practical thing, which is that it only really the mix and like overdubs and all this kind of thing was only really finished like 2 weeks before the song came out. So it was kind of not possible for it to be on the record, or it would have been kind of like one of those situations where, oh, we've got like a rubbish version of the song and you're just going to have to eat it up for the, I don't know, just rather just have it not on the album. It can be on something else.
Okay. Would you say like, you're kind of like alluding to this kind of prevailing mood and emotion that, a lot of the songs that is kind of a common thread between all the tracks. I mean, would you be able to specify what exactly that emotion is that was kind of like driving this era of, your writing process?
I think it's just like having a song where there's kind of like contradictions within the song, within the lyrics. And then as like, this is, I guess, lyrically, I don't know. I know all the instrumentation, I guess, is supposed to reinforce that. But it's like this having this thing of multiple perspectives happening at the same time. And because I'm the only one singing on the record, or like the main voice of the record, you can kind of play with how much you show that or not. So, yeah.
So in a way, from your writing style on this, would you say that you're sort of almost like, kind of like a narrator who's like changing different voices or points of view across like these songs? Are they functioning in sort of almost like a story kind of sense?
I think it's like, I don't know, it's like I guess, you know, uh remix bits of like found footage or whatever, that kind of thing. It's not necessarily like inhabiting any character. It's slightly more impersonal than that, I guess.
Fair, fair. Going on from there, like, are you planning on doing any sort of like, you know, big promo visuals behind the album as well that are going to be rolling out, along with its, release this week as well?
Yeah, there's I finished it today. There's this like there's quite a few songs that I've kind of finished or written in between finishing the album and doing this whole like releasing it and stuff. And then I've been trying multi tracks of every show. So I've one of the tracks this week I kind of edited together every live version into one like song, into just like I guess the master version of that song, but a live recording. And then that'll come out on Thursday, which is in Thursday. So I finished that today, and then there'll be videos hopefully for every track. I just kind of like messaged a few people and was like, well, there's not that much money because it's all like the final video budget is all going into more videos, but it'd be cool. Everyone's going to have free reign.
Of which track on the track list would you say, like, again, giving people like a bit of a heads up for what's coming? Given what people know of your work in Black MIDI and stuff, like what song do you feel like might take listeners coming into this like most by surprise in terms of like either the way you're writing it or even like sort of the instrumental palette that you're going for?
Well, I mean, I guess Love Story is the least Black MIDI one, and then also One Night is like, you know, not necessarily a song that I would have like before writing it would have thought, oh yeah, let's do that. But I think they all earn their place on the record, and it's I think this thing of it's not necessarily it's more about like do they fit the right mood? Like I think numerology would have like if it was on the album, it would be one of the best tracks on the record, and that's why it was the lead single. But it doesn't add anything to the record itself.
Hmm.
If anything, it takes away from it. So yeah, I think Love Story and One Night maybe to Black MIDI fans. Yeah.
Would One Night, you say, the closing track on the record, does that share like a similarly kind of whimsical tone? There's almost like a musical theater quality to the instrumentation, how the story and that kind of like plays out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also yes, it's kind of like another side to numerology lyrically as well.
Hmm.
They both kind of do the same thing, except numerology is fun and one night's not fun.
I don't know if I would go as far as to say One Night isn't fun at all. Like, I actually kind of like
the lyrics.
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. That aspect of it. Sure. But I mean, there's like, again, I would say almost like an element of camp to it that I think is like really expressive. I mean, I know that when we played the song on stream, obviously it's not like the punch to the gut that numerology instrumentally is, but like, I don't know, there's just something about what you did on the instrumentation with that track that immediately evoked like, I just felt like I was watching a sad guy walking down the street, hands in his pockets, like, oh shucks, it's like,
what's gonna happen?
Yeah, I felt like before you even said anything, I felt like I envisioned the character that this sort of like music made sense for, and I think there's something about that.
Yeah, I mean, I like the solo as well. Is kind of I think what earns it a place on the record.
Right.
Yeah, Alex from Caroline did that. It's great.
And probably like a funny, stupid question, but like what was this at all in any way inspired by the fact that you guys did that funny little Taylor Swift Love Story cover? It's like is this your own sort of like is this you throwing your hat into the Love Story ring? Because
well, I guess it's the story ends the opposite way. I guess
right. Yeah. No.
One.
True.
But I thought that like with all the songs on the records that some of them kind of didn't really have a title until the end, but this one I kind of thought it should be that the whole time. It wasn't really a sort of a thing of I don't know, like let's be silly and name it the same as the Taylor Swift song. I just thought it was a very literal title, and I think some of the songs is kind of like the title is like the key to, I don't know, working out things in the song or whatever. I think it just helps. Yeah, it's, it's good.
Is there anything else you would say in terms of like titling or the way that you sort of like conceptualize these tracks that's like equally as literal? Like for example, is Heart of Darkness a nod to Joseph Conrad? For example, something like that.
Yeah, I mean that's I guess I kind of also what I was referring to about like I guess being the key to the song because I wasn't thinking about the novel when I did the lyrics, and then it had this other working title that was horrible. I hadn't thought about the novel when I was writing the lyrics, but then when the label was kind of getting close to the deadline saying we actually need titles for this, I can't remember what it was, but something reminded me of the novel, and I thought, oh yeah, it's the narrative is basically the same, so it kind of worked. It's functional. It's not that sexy, but it's functional.
Mm. So it's like less direct inspiration, but more like a realized parallel between what you were
Yeah,
writing and kind of what was there.
exactly. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Um, so I mean, you're talking about Love Story being like more taking people by surprise, given the instrumentation that people might expect from a project that you were tied into. But are there, also kind of like acknowledging that numerology might stick out a bit like a sore thumb, given how I guess frantic it is maybe by comparison. Are there, other instrumentals and performances on the record that are comparably like lively or, more influenced by prog or jazz, like, again, like people might be sort of expecting or familiar with?
Yeah, probably. I think in the blink of the eye,
Hmm.
in the blink of an eye is the most, I guess, Black MIDI-ish song
Hmm.
on the record.
Would you say that sort of having Caroline though in the mix, because I know there's a lot of people who have, followed what I do or aware of a lot of the highlights on their recent album. Were there moments having them in the mix with you that you were able to sort of like pull a lot of direct inspiration or sort of like, collaborative ideas from them to sort of like make these songs come together into their final form?
Well, I feel like in some ways, yeah, and each of them brings a very distinct character to their own band and also to the record.
Hmm.
And I think the big thing for me, I think, especially in initially approaching them, is that one, they're a big group of people, and two, they're a bit older, and like they kind of, this isn't necessarily a criticism of Black MIDI, but they talk through things like a lot before doing it. Like I say, it's like 80-20 talking to doing. Which it was just interesting for me because it's completely the opposite with Black MIDI. And it was kind of like just I think nice to like at least I don't know, be open to this different way of working. I kind of like, I don't know, just preferred generally just to do things and then see what happens later. But it was, I think it was important for the process of the record to basically like open up to, you know, having that day in the studio and spending a lot of it just kind of like talking through what you're going to do and why you're going to do it, as opposed to kind of like doing a bunch of stuff and excavating it later, which, both have their merits, but I think it was just cool to try a different way of working.
Uh, but given that this is sort of like, and I don't know, I guess what you consider to be the official creative dynamics behind my new band Believe, is this something that like at the end of the day you would say that like you strictly are the person like spearheading this and you have to make those kind of like, final big ticket decisions and calls like on your own, or are you also like trying to forge maybe a bit more of like a democratic, sort of like a sense in terms of like how, things are finalized and songs are written and things are created and decided upon?
Yeah, this record was I don't know. It's interesting because it's functionally it is a solo record where yeah, I was the boss,
Right.
but the dictator. But I obviously like saw a lot of collaborations throughout the record, and it wasn't really a thing of in the room telling people what to do necessarily or like charting things out specifically. It was like often afterwards, kind of like then making the decision afterwards. Basically, like what I was saying before about I guess the similar approach that we did in Black Midi, which is like try a bunch of stuff, and not necessarily like I don't know. It was a lot of the time. If it was, I have an idea and I'd say to someone, try this, and if it didn't work after two times, then just move on to something else. So yeah, it was like quite collaborative, and like lots of people's input was often like, yeah, like a lot of emphasis placed on other people's input. I mean, Kieran's like string arrangements, I didn't really, change too much or like have a great deal of feedback because they were just really good.
Hmm.
And yeah, just like a lot of trusting in other people, but then like the sound of it and where it was used is obviously like my decision.
You were referring to kind of laying the groundwork for what you were um, doing at these live shows and making reference to the windmill. And, obviously there's the much discussed scene building and sort of like, continuing to exist around that venue at this point. And, it's been sort of like this thing that's been often referenced for a point of years now. And I don't know if it's like out or still about to come out. I even recently took part in a discussion around a documentary that's being like filmed and written about the space.
I feel
I
like there
mean,
were multiple documentaries being filmed at the same
yeah,
time.
there probably are, honestly. But as somebody who has like direct experience, with that scene and has continued to be involved with it, like, do you have any sort of like comments on the way it may have shifted or evolved since, like the early days of Black Midi? Do you feel like the venue and the space and the community are still sort of like positively serving the purpose that they did when you guys were first like starting to build your career, of things like sort of moved and shifted due to the increased amount of attention and focus, on everyone that's come out of that venue?
I mean, it's always been shifting and changing since Tim, who runs it, took it over as the booker.
Hmm.
And I mean, every 5 years a different group of bands kind of came through and like Law and that in like the mid 2000s, and then Fat White Family like early 2010s, and like Shame mid 2010s, and then us towards the end. And then I'm sure there's a bunch of new, well, there are a bunch of new bands now. So it's this kind of constantly evolving thing. And the main thing is that, Tim just does a really good job of people basically just come back because they get paid properly. Um, and that's the main thing. There's good curation. He puts on what he likes, and that's kind of pretty much his only criteria for it. And you don't get stiffed on the door. And that's like, obviously I have a sentimental attachment to it because I played there and lots of my friends played there when we were teenagers. But I keep coming back because of a good relationship with Tim, and yeah, you get paid what comes in on the door goes to you basically. And yeah, I mean, I feel like with this record, I was like slightly trying, because that's the thing as well, is that I think that maybe this notion of a windmill scene does a bit of disservice to the interconnectedness of the wider London music world.
Hmm.
I think, bands like Caroline and all this, and Kieran and Shovel Dance Collective, and like loads of other people, like, and then there's also like the London jazz scene and this kind of thing. It's all like connected. But just because some, like Caroline never played the windmill or whatever, and obviously it's benefits people that it exists because they get more exposure and like some association, blah blah blah, whatever. But yeah, I feel like, it's a useful media term, but like the reality of the windmill scene is this thing that's always shifting. So it's kind of like you can't really put a pin on it necessarily.
Hmm. Hmm. Well put. Thank you for kind of like putting it into perspective. I mean, there is a lot of, honestly, whether it's the windmill scene or beyond, there is like, I think, out of the years that I've been doing what I do, I feel like using the word inordinate feels weird, because sometimes there's negative kind of terms attached to that, or sort of like, feelings attached to that term. And on top of it, like, it's not like there has never been a point in any decade that I've been alive or following music where, the UK has not been like right there in terms of like a heavy influence on like the modern music landscape, but it does feel like right now there is like almost a moment happening once again, per usual with you guys. Um, Whether it's like, cool artists coming out of there, or the way that the country is sort of like being a lot more dominant on the hip hop front these days. I mean, everybody's obviously talking about like, SD Kid being this massive force. And, personally, I've been loving a lot of IDK's sorry, I meant Jim Legacy lately with his like recent single IDK. Are any of these artists like people you've been plugged into lately, or do you yourself feel that like there is definitely like a huge I guess kind of like buzz about a lot of young UK artists at the moment, be it either stuff that you're doing, something some of these rap artists are doing, or even like Ray, Olivia Dean. It kind of seems like a lot of attention is being drawn your guys' direction.
It's good, benefits everyone that there's this kind of people talking about it. And, like I said, it's probably more connected than people think. I mean, I went to school with Olivia Dean.
Hmm.
So, like, and a lot of, and all of us in Black Midi, we all went to school with her. And like, a lot of, yeah, it's like, obviously we went to the Brit school. So it's kind of like, that's kind of, I guess, the intended thing with the school is that people go out and do loads of different things. But there's like, yeah, there's like that, like what I was saying about the interconnectedness. There's a lot of connections between all these bands, and like, I know that Jim Legacy is a big Caroline fan and all this kind of thing. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah, people don't know. I think after I reviewed his record, I mean, not to blow up his spot too much, but he said thanks. But then he, was telling me about these different indie artists that he's into, and he asked for a bunch of recommendations. And I like, put him onto a few dozen, different things, and he was like pretty excited. He's a big indie head and a big like underground rock head. He likes a lot of different stuff.
But I think, that's the thing as well, is that people aren't really closed-minded, or people are very open-minded to listening to loads of different things. And that's also what's interesting, is that the range of what people are sampling is quite wide, and it's kind of, and there's also like not necessarily a distinction of I guess high and low like taste signifiers and that kind of thing. That you're just sampling whatever sounds good, which is cool. I like it.
It's true. I agree with what you're saying, especially insofar as we're talking about artists. At least in my experience, I do feel like, and this has not always been the case, I do think we're like operating a little bit of an era, especially due to like the narrowness of people's algorithms, where a lot of people are just like not really being exposed to maybe as wide of a swath of different sounds or musicians as maybe they were like 10 years ago. Where maybe things were like less confined and, sort of like oriented around people's For You pages or whatever, and just sort of like the endless kind of like short form scroll or whatever. But I do feel like there is almost like, I don't know, weird of a bit of a weird limitation of sorts that some people are kind of like suffering from without them being fully aware of it. Do you yourself sort of like, as you continue to write and record and serve, music, do you yourself sort of like ever kind of second guess or sort of like worry about, kind of the expectations of the listener, or like what people are kind of like prepared to hear, open to hear?
I think the one thing I did to kind of, I guess, like try and release any, or like relieve any sort of possibility for me to feel that pressure, was I did all these kind of very low stakes and physical only mixtapes of basically like, not necessarily demos, but like things that I intentionally left unfinished, or just like following some idea that I knew like probably wouldn't get picked, like wouldn't be work, like something that I didn't necessarily want to get reviewed, just because I knew that it's like a personal project or something. But I knew that but people that were interested would pick up on it. So I did. There's one that I did, which is basically I've got them here. I'll show you. Please. Basically one of them is like, I basically started making them on tour because I was touring with Black Country in America, and the visa was really expensive. I needed to make some money, and CDs have a high profit margin. So I basically made true. this demo tape, and which is kind of like an hour, 45 minutes of continuous music, and like a lot of the ideas for songs from this record are on it. And then I did another one, which is basically just like a live recording that I edited loads. I'm plugging them all here. And then there's this other one, which is not that good. But yeah, I basically made a bunch of these, and then kind of like focused on the album, but without there really being much, I guess. Yeah, it was just a thing of like the people that were actually like really interested in Black MIDI or like interested enough to like punt 10 quid on a CD that they didn't know was going to be good enough. They kind of like had something, and then I could have a bit more, do this album kind of like quietly on the side without feeling that much pressure about it, and
No,
have
I
time
mean,
to explore a bunch of other things.
are you still going to have some of these like when you go out for this album over here?
Still got a bunch of the white ones,
Okay.
so I need to get
No,
rid
I
of
mean,
them.
listen, take them with you. Listen, these sorts of things, in my opinion, are like the secret sauce. I feel like some people kind of like overlook in the digital age. I mean, very well established bands over and over, like Swans, for example, have repeatedly like funded new projects, doing like, hey, here's this kind of like album of rough cuts, live stuff,
Yeah.
ideas that could make it onto a record, and people who are like really into it and want to support will buy in. And I feel like that's a functional way of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, it paid for when I first did it, it paid for my studio for like a year.
Right.
So it's pretty great. I've kind of been focusing more on, doing the actual band stuff now, but yeah, I mean, I had a great time doing it, and obviously like worked out really well.
And, did this at all serve an additional sort of like purpose in terms of like, were you able to get from people who heard these things, or even just you yourself kind of like making and listening back to it? Did this sort of like help you whittle down like what things and ideas you want to keep? Or did you get feedback on certain things, sharing it around, or sort of like exposing it to the world?
Um, yeah, I mean, the one of them was basically like a half an hour version of a track that I wanted to put on the record, and I guess this is kind of like a negative story because I did it, and then I was like, actually, I don't want to put this on the record. But it was, it's good to do, and I think that the version on the CD is fine. I think that was more the thing, is like I've done this now. Oh, okay, let's
Uh,
do something else on the record.
Honestly, like I feel like it ends up being kind of like a win-win, because either you find out an idea that you want to push further and complete and end up putting on an album. And even if you don't, it ends up being this kind of like special, unique thing that's like just on that CD. And like, it becomes that singular experience that you either kind of heard or you missed because you were sort of like tuned in enough or actually like following closely.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think there's also this unrestrained thing about it, was where it's like, because not that much collaborations involved, and also uh because it's only going to go to like a kind of like narrow audience of people that are probably going to like appreciate its flaws, that then the flaws become something interesting about the work itself as well.
Thank you for letting me in on the process a bit here. I think like, again, I think this is like kind of a bit of an underrated way of doing things when you're trying to feel stuff out. And this was like way more common practice during an era where, artists had no choice but to sort of like put out their stuff physically. And now that like everything is mostly streaming and digital, this has like become almost like kind of an underrated way of going about things.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, you can turn it around really quickly as well. Like,
Hmm.
records take 6 months, whereas a CD you can get in a month.
And also in addition to that, there is sort of like the increase kind of like, I think, demand and interest among like a lot of young music listeners that like, oh, I'm like really into my physical media collection now. And like I'm constantly seeing TikToks about, here's my physical media collection, let me give you a tour of my physical media
Yeah.
collection. But I mean, it's become a cool, neat little thing for people to actually kind of care about again.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I also like, obviously grew up in the CD era, or the tail end of it. And also, touring, I've sort of thought practically, I just bought loads of more CDs than I bought records while on tour,
Hmm.
because they're easier to take home, smaller,
That's
and they're way cheaper.
Yeah, no, I mean, right now they are way cheaper. And I mean, if I was on tour, I would not want to be lugging around a couple pounds worth of vinyl from state or city to city to
Nightmare.
city. Yeah, absolutely nightmare. Listen, I'm very excited to hear the record. All of us are. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about it and give us a heads up. And,
No.
good luck on the shows that are following and, selling the rest of those white CDs.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Is there
Thanks for
anything
your time
else,
too.
coming around the corner that you want to give us a heads up on with the project?
Well, with touring lots, maybe more singles, hopefully, if I finish them.
Hmm.
Mm. And yeah, just yeah, hopefully lots more music.
All right. Well, thank you very
That's
much,
fun.
sir. Have a good one.
Yeah, likewise. Have a good evening or afternoon.
I'll
Rest of
be
your
having a good
afternoon.
I'll
Early
be having a
evening.
good afternoon.